courtroom was silent. A mother trembled behind dark sunglasses, her body shuddering as her son, convicted of one of the most horrifying crimes in recent history, was led away in shackles. She waited, hoping for something. A glance, a word, some human acknowledgement from the boy she once raised. But Bryan Kohberger said nothing. He turned his back and walked into the shadows of 4 life sentences. You're watching the dark stories, where we don't just tell you what happened, we try to understand why. Today, we're unpacking every emotional detail, every chilling silence, and every psychological crack that revealed itself during the sentencing of Bryan Kohberger. A sentencing that left 2 families broken, and the world still asking, how could this happen? Let's go back, before the courtroom, before the headlines, before the heartbreak. It was early morning on November 13th, 2022, when a 911 call shattered the calm of Moscow, Idaho. A brutal scene awaited inside a 3-story rental home near the University of Idaho. 4 bright young lives had been taken with unimaginable violence. Madison Mogan, Kaylee Goncalves, Xana Kernodle, and Ethan Chapin, all between 20 and 21 years old, were found stabbed to death. 2 other roommates miraculously had survived. There was no forced entry, no motive, no suspect, and no peace. But investigators began piecing together digital traces, surveillance footage, cell tower pings, security camera footage of a white Hyundai Elantra. And then, the breakthrough. A single male DNA sample on a knife sheath left at the crime scene. That DNA would eventually match a man hundreds of miles away. Bryan Kohberger, a 28-year-old PhD criminology student living just across the border in Pullman, Washington. Bryan Kohberger wasn't just any suspect. He was someone who had studied criminal behavior for years. He held a master's degree in criminal justice. He had been a teaching assistant. He conducted surveys, asking convicted criminals how they chose their victims. To some, was intelligent, quiet, awkward. To others, there was something deeply unsettling beneath the surface. An absence of empathy. A coldness that didn't make sense. Former classmates described him as controlling, at times smug, even creepy. He kept to himself but paid close attention to others. The kind of person who watched from the edges, cataloguing people, like data. And yet, no one, not his family, not his professors, not even the FBI analysts, could have predicted what he was capable of. Because the line between studying evil and committing evil is razor thin, and Bryan Kohberger crossed it. On December 30th, 2022, just 6 weeks after the murders, Kohberger was arrested in Pennsylvania at his parents' home during a pre-dawn SWAT raid. The news stunned the nation. People asked, why would a criminal justice student commit such a heinous act? Was he trying to perfect the perfect crime? Was this an experiment, a power fantasy, revenge? His family, Marianne and Michael Kohberger, and his sisters Amanda and Melissa, were devastated. Publicly, they stood by him, asking for due process. Privately, sources say they were deeply conflicted. They wanted to believe he was innocent, but the evidence kept stacking up. The knife sheath, the phone data, the surveillance footage, the car, the DNA, and worst of all, the lack of an alibi. As the case moved to trial, Kohberger entered a not guilty plea, but as pre-trial motions unfolded, delays mounted. The defense challenged the validity of the DNA collection. They raised issues with the grand jury indictment. They attempted to move the trial out of Latah County. But then, 3 weeks before sentencing, Kohberger reversed course. In a surprise confession, he admitted to the murders. He accepted a plea deal that guaranteed life in prison without parole, in exchange for avoiding the death penalty. There would be no trial, no cross-examinations, no emotional testimony from the surviving roommates, just sentencing. The courtroom was packed on Wednesday, July 23, 2025. Families of the victims filled the rows. Reporters stood by. But on the defendant's side, only two people showed up. Bryan Kohberger and Amanda Kohberger, his mother and sister. Bryan was described as visibly distressed, trembling in her seat. She wore large, dark sunglasses, possibly to shield her swollen eyes from the press. At one point, she put her head in her hands and began to shake. Amanda leaned in close, as if trying to shield her mother from the outside world. They sat there, two women who had already lost the son and brother they once knew. Now, they were about to lose him to the prison system forever. When the sentence was finally read aloud, the room fell silent. 4 life sentences without parole, 1 for each murder victim, 10 additional years for burglary, $270,000 in fines and civil penalties. It was done. The legal system had spoken, but nothing could prepare them for what came next. As Kohberger stood to be taken into custody, he glanced briefly toward the gallery. A nod, a half smile, and then nothing. He didn't speak to his mother. He didn't acknowledge his sister. He walked away, as if they weren't even there. For Bryan, that brief second of eye contact might have been the last she'll ever have with her son outside of prison glass. She raised him. She wrote to him. She believed in his innocence. And in the end, he gave her nothing back. This wasn't just about punishment. It was about emotional devastation. Not only had she lost the boy she once knew, she had to watch him walk away as if she never mattered. So often in these stories, the victims' families become the voice of grief, and rightly so. But there's another layer of tragedy here. What happens to the families of the perpetrator? Kim Kaylee, the grandmother of Madison Mogen, said something few people expected to hear. My heart aches for the kids' roommates, for the families of the victims, and also for the family of the perpetrator. That level of empathy, coming from someone who lost a granddaughter in the worst way imaginable, is something we rarely see, but it speaks volumes. Because the truth is, no one wins here. 4 young lives were taken. Their families will never be the same. And Bryan Kohberger's family will live with the weight of his actions for the rest of their lives. Bryan Kohberger will now undergo a mandatory 2-week evaluation by the Idaho Department of Corrections, where officials will determine the safest and most secure placement for him. It's likely he'll be housed in Idaho's single maximum security facility, although officials have considered placing him out of state due to safety risks. He'll spend the rest of his life behind bars. No parole, no second chances. A PhD student of criminology, now a case study himself. This case has always been more than just a headline. It's a tragedy that spans across victims, towns, and families. Madison, Kaylee, Xana, Ethan. We say their names not just to remember them, but to honor them. And to the Kohbergers, there are no easy words, only silence. The same silence that Bryan left them with in court. In the end, Bryan Kohberger wasn't just sentenced by the court. He was sentenced by the lives he destroyed, and by the family he abandoned with a single, cold goodbye. Thank you for watching The Dark Stories. If this case moved you, if you believe in deep storytelling with empathy and truth, please like, subscribe, and join us again. Because in the dark, we search for the light.